Get out, now! The manager snapped. This is a five-star hotel, not some roadside stop. You clearly don't belong here, not dressed like that, not with that attitude, and definitely not in the presidential suite. That was the first thing Camille Jordan heard when she stepped up to the front desk that evening. Not a welcome, not a question, just judgment, delivered with a smile that wasn't kind, but cruel. It landed sharp, like a slap in front of everyone standing there, guests waiting in line, bellhops in uniform, and two front desk staff who didn't blink. Before we dive in, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. If this story stirs something in you, anger, reflection, or just a deep sigh, like, subscribe, and tap the bell. This isn't just a story, it's a reminder of how fast people judge and how power answers. Now let's go back to 6:45 p.m., Midtown Manhattan, inside the newly opened Grand Oak Hotel, a place that sells luxury, silence, and image. Fresh-cut orchids lined the walls. Soft jazz floated overhead, and the marble floors were so polished they reflected the soles of your shoes. And right there, just inside the grand revolving doors, stood Camille Jordan, calm, tall, alone. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't loud. She walked in quietly, rolling a leather carry-on and holding a thin laptop case under her arm. Her tailored blazer fit her perfectly. Her tan slacks and clean low heels gave off a quiet confidence. Her hair was pulled back in a neat, natural bun. No makeup, no assistant, no bodyguard, just her. And that was enough for them to doubt her. She approached the desk and spoke clearly, respectfully. Good evening. I have a reservation under Camille Jordan, presidential suite. The woman behind the counter, Gina, blinked once and raised an eyebrow. She was in her 30s, sharp suit, polished smile, the kind of smile that fades the moment your back turns. She typed slowly, then looked up with a tilt of suspicion. The presidential suite? She asked. Yes. Camille answered, calm and steady. I booked directly through your website. My assistant confirmed it this morning. Gina's tone shifted. That half-sweet, half-guarded politeness reserved for people she didn't trust. That suite is $3,800 per night, plus a $2,000 deposit, she said. We require full payment up front. Camille nodded. The card should already be on file. Corporate Amex. Gina squinted at the screen. I don't see anything. Did you maybe use a third-party site? No, Camille said simply. I booked direct. Gina pressed her lips tight, then turned to whisper to someone at the side of the desk. Kyle, the duty manager. Tall, white, navy blue suit, air of importance. He stepped forward and looked Camille over from head to toe before he even said hello. Is there a problem here? He asked. She claims she booked the presidential suite, Gina whispered. Not quietly enough. Says the payment's on file, but nothing's showing. Kyle smiled, but it wasn't warm. He turned to Camille and said, Ma'am, we're not seeing any active payment here, given the level of the room. We'll need more verification. Fraud with high-end rooms is, unfortunately, common. Camille raised an eyebrow. Are you accusing me of fraud? Kyle raised his hands slightly, like he was being reasonable. Not at all, but typically. Our presidential guests arrive through private concierge, not alone, pulling a suitcase. You understand we have to be careful. She looked him directly in the eye. I'm Camille Jordan, she said. I'm not just a guest. I'm one of the investors behind this property. Kyle didn't blink. Anyone can say that, he replied. You'll need more than a name to convince me. Camille held back a breath. Look in your system, she said. You'll see my reservation, and if you dig just a bit deeper, you'll find my name in your ownership file. I don't have access to investor records, Kyle said flatly. And unless you have another card, or someone here to vouch for you, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside. We have other guests waiting." Then he leaned in slightly, lowered his voice, and delivered it with the kind of smile that makes your skin crawl. "Get out. Now. This hotel has standards, and you clearly don't meet them." Camille stood still, not angry, not defensive, just still. Her silence was louder than any outburst. She slowly reached into her blazer, pulled out her phone, and tapped a message. Then she turned to the waiting area, pulled her suitcase beside her, and sat down. Her eyes didn't scan the room. She didn't try to argue again. She'd done enough. Because in less than 15 minutes, the very people who dismissed her were about to find out who she really was, and none of them were ready for it. The silence in the lobby was heavier than stone. Camille sat quietly on the side bench, her suitcase at her feet, her fingers gently folded in her lap. The soft hum of jazz music overhead seemed almost mocking now. Just moments earlier, she'd been humiliated in front of a full room of strangers. And while she sat still, composed, everyone else was watching. Some tried not to look, others stared openly. One couple whispered, then shook their heads and walked away. But it wasn't just the guests who were uncomfortable. The staff noticed too, behind the desk. Gina kept glancing toward Camille, arms crossed, still convinced she'd handled the situation. Kyle stood confidently at the counter, casually sipping from a hotel-branded water bottle like nothing was wrong. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Camille hadn't moved. She hadn't spoken. But she wasn't done. The message she sent earlier had already been received, though no one in that lobby knew it. Not yet. 5 minutes passed. Then 6. Then 7. And that's when things got worse. Dean, one of the hotel security guards, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with a badge that hung too tight on his belt, approached slowly. His steps were deliberate, controlled, as if Camille's calm presence somehow posed a risk. "Ma'am," he said, his voice even but condescending, "we're going to need you to leave the lobby now. Management's asked that you vacate the area until your identity can be verified." Camille looked up. "I told them who I am." "I understand," he said quickly. "But for now, I need you to exit the building. You can come back once things are cleared up." She shook her head once. "I'm not disturbing anyone. I'm not breaking any law. I have a confirmed reservation, and I've done nothing wrong." Dean gave a short breath through his nose. "You're refusing to leave?" "I'm refusing to be treated like a criminal in a hotel I partially own," she said calmly. That line, that one sentence, made Gina roll her eyes and Kyle mutter something under his breath at the desk. Dean's tone shifted. "Ma'am, please don't make this harder than it has to be. We don't want this to become an incident." Camille slowly stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't flinch. "You made it an incident the second you assumed I didn't belong here." Dean reached for the handle of her suitcase. "Don't touch my bag," she said, quietly but firmly. That stopped him. For a moment. But behind him, Kyle stepped forward, loudly. "This is enough. Escort her outside, now. If she comes back with proof, fine. But we don't have time to play games with guests who show up claiming they own the place." The phrase hit hard, not just for Camille, but for several people watching nearby. One woman, mid-50s, light gray sweater, short haircut, turned to her husband. "Did he just say that out loud?" she whispered. He nodded. A few others now took out their phones. Discreetly, quietly, but deliberately. Emily Sanders, a hotel guest who had just arrived from Chicago, had been standing near the elevators. She stepped to the side, out of view, and began recording from her phone. She didn't say anything. She just captured the look on Camille's face, and the way Dean now blocked her path like she was a threat. At this point, Camille had two choices: yell and be dragged out, or do what she always did, rise above it. She took a slow breath and said just loud enough to be heard, "You're making a mistake. I gave you the chance to do the right thing. Quietly. But you've chosen this." Kyle rolled his eyes. "We've chosen to follow policy. If you don't leave, we'll call NYPD and let them sort out whether or not you're who you say you are." That was the line. The one that finally shattered the fragile calm in the room. Even Dean looked unsure now. Maya, a younger front desk clerk who'd been silent this entire time, finally stepped forward. Her voice shook a little, but she spoke up. "Kyle, maybe we should wait. Just a few minutes. Something about this feels off." Gina shot her a glare. "Off? Are you seriously taking her side?" Maya didn't respond. She just looked back at Camille, who nodded gently, not in gratitude, but in acknowledgement. Camille knew what it took for someone like Maya to speak up in a place like this, but Kyle had already made up his mind. "Escort her out. Now." Dean stepped forward again. Camille didn't resist. She didn't argue. She simply said, 7 more minutes." Dean paused. "What?" "In 7 minutes," she said softly. "You'll understand exactly why you shouldn't have touched my bag, why you shouldn't have spoken to me that way, why every guest in this lobby will remember this moment, but not for the reasons you think." Dean hesitated. So did Kyle. For the first time. Real doubt crept in. The guests watching didn't know who Camille was, but they knew now. She wasn't some random woman causing a scene. There was purpose in her calm. There was weight behind every word she said. She picked up her suitcase and rolled it toward the far wall, out of the main walkway, but still inside the lobby. Dean followed, but didn't force her again. Kyle stepped back behind the desk, but his hands were no longer steady. Gina pulled her blazer straight. Maya stayed quiet, but her eyes didn't leave Camille. And for the first time that night, the energy shifted. Something was coming. No one knew what, but they could feel it. In 7 minutes, the room would look very different. And no one, not Kyle, not Gina, not even Camille, would walk away unchanged. Camille stood by the far wall of the Grand Oak lobby, her suitcase beside her, arms gently crossed, as if holding herself steady from the storm swirling around her. The mood had shifted. The air felt heavier, tighter. No one was quite sure what to do next. Dean, the security guard, stood only a few feet away, pacing lightly, trying to look confident, but glancing at Camille every few seconds like she was a ticking clock he didn't understand. Kyle, back behind the front desk, leaned into the terminal, pretending to check reservations, but mostly avoiding eye contact. Gina whispered something to Maya, a question, maybe a warning. While guests looked on from a safe but curious distance, Camille didn't say anything, not yet, but she wasn't waiting idly. Her phone was in her hand now, subtle beneath her blazer. She had already sent one message. A second had just been delivered. 6 minutes had passed. And then Kyle's voice broke the tension. "I want you to call the cardholder for that Amex," he said to Gina, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Let's confirm who actually owns it. I've seen enough identity theft scams to know how this plays out." Camille raised her eyes slowly. "Are you accusing me of stealing my own credit card?" Kyle didn't flinch. "I'm saying nothing about this makes sense. You show up with no escort, no proof, claiming you're some high-level investor, but nothing about your file checks out," Gina chimed in. "She's not even in our high-tier guest database. We checked." Camille narrowed her gaze. "So because I didn't come in wearing jewelry and loud logos, I must be pretending to be someone else?" Kyle folded his arms. "That's not what I said." "No," Camille replied. "But it's what you meant." Dean stepped closer again, as if preparing to intervene. "Look, ma'am," he said carefully. "If you're really telling the truth, I'm sure this can all be sorted out. Just not here. Not now. We can help you outside while we verify things." Camille turned slightly, her voice still quiet. "What you're offering isn't help. It's removal." She held up her phone. "Would you like to speak with my assistant? She's on her way." Kyle scoffed. "Great. Now she has an assistant. This is escalating quickly." "It's escalating because you chose to treat me like a problem instead of a guest." Camille answered. "You refused to check the facts. You ignored protocol. You've made up your mind about me based entirely on how I look." Gina looked genuinely offended. "That's not true. We treat everyone with the same process." Camille didn't blink. "That's the problem." A sharp silence followed. No one had anything to say to that, until James Holt walked in, the head of security, tall, clean-cut, with a voice like concrete. He approached the desk, already updated through whispers and hand signals. Kyle greeted him with a brief nod and filled him in. James turned to Camille and gave her a once-over. Not rude, just assessing. "Ma'am," he began, "we've had some concerning behavior reports. You've been asked multiple times to leave the lobby, and you've refused." "Because I'm a paying guest," she said. "I booked the presidential suite, confirmed payment through your own system, and now I'm being accused of fraud because you don't like how I arrived." James didn't blink. "I'm not here to argue, but if you can't prove your identity, and if you continue to make the staff uncomfortable, I'll have no choice but to notify authorities." Camille stepped forward slightly. "Are you threatening to call the police on a woman who gave you her ID, her reservation number, and her corporate card? All because your manager doesn't believe I look the part?" James kept his tone flat. "I'm saying we follow procedure, and right now, your story doesn't match our records." Maya, still behind the desk, shifted uncomfortably. Her hands fidgeted near the keyboard, eyes darting between the others. She opened her mouth, then stopped, then tried again. "Actually, if I may," she said hesitantly, "I just double-checked the internal ownership database. There is a Camille Jordan listed, 30% stake, Jordan Lux Holdings. Her name's on the property documents, right here." She turned the screen toward Kyle. Kyle squinted. "That could be anyone. Doesn't prove this woman is her." Camille leaned her hands on the counter now, calm but clear. "So even when my name is in your system, on your ownership papers, that still isn't enough?" "Forgive me," Kyle said coldly, "but we've seen scams go pretty deep. You could have printed that out from a laptop at a coffee shop." Camille straightened up. Her face was unreadable, but something behind her eyes shifted. Not anger, not pride, something deeper. A quiet realization that this wasn't just disrespect. This was systemic. It was the kind of treatment built not from rules, but from years of unchecked bias, hiding behind policy. "You're calling me a fraud," she said finally, "and I've given you more than any other guest is ever asked to provide." James nodded slightly. "Because this situation is unusual." Camille took a long breath and looked him dead in the eye. "No. What's unusual is that a black woman walking into her own hotel still has to prove she belongs." Her phone buzzed quietly. She read the message, then slowly tucked it away. "You have 1 more minute," she said. "Then the room changes." James raised a brow. "Excuse me?" Camille looked past him, toward the front entrance. "You'll see." A few more guests had started to gather by now. Whispers passed between couples. Phones stayed low, but cameras rolled. Emily, still recording from her corner, zoomed in as the tension cracked the air. Gina whispered to Kyle, "What if she's not lying?" Kyle didn't answer. He didn't know how, because deep down, in that very moment. He was starting to feel it too. He didn't know who Camille Jordan really was, but something told him. He was about to find out. The tension in the lobby had ripened into something sharp, something no one could ignore anymore. Guests who had once been focused on check-ins and travel plans were now watching, holding their breath, trying to make sense of what was unfolding before them. Camille remained still, standing near the front desk with her hands calmly resting on the edge, her gaze unwavering. The soft hotel jazz playing overhead had become almost ironic, like background music to a disaster no one could stop. James, the head of security, stood across from her, arms folded. Kyle hovered behind the desk, eyes flicking between the front door and Camille's face, a cocktail of arrogance and growing uncertainty. Gina clutched a clipboard as if it gave her authority. Maya stayed quiet, shoulders tense, trying to stay small behind her station. Emily, the guest with the phone camera, was still recording quietly from the corner, capturing every word, every breath, every choice. And then, Kyle did something that made the whole room freeze. "You know what?" he said, stepping forward with that same smirk he wore when he dismissed her reservation. "If you really are who you say you are, if you really own 30% of this place, then why don't you show us some real proof? Not emails, not a name in a database, something we can verify." Camille didn't move. She didn't blink. "You had your chance to do that yourself," she said softly. "I gave you time, space, and the benefit of the doubt. This is New York," Kyle said louder now, as if he needed a crowd to back him. "We've seen people fake entire investment portfolios to get into places they don't belong. You don't just walk into a 5-star hotel claiming to own it. That's not how this works." Camille tilted her head slightly. "Interesting how that logic only seems to apply to people like me." James raised a hand, trying to contain the scene, but Camille held up a single finger and said, "Don't. You've already chosen your side." James hesitated, and then took a step back. It was subtle, but it mattered. Kyle, though, wasn't finished. "You've given us no official documentation, no contact, no legal rep, no driver, no assistant, no meeting on the books. You really expect us to believe that someone like you, alone, dressed like that, no luggage service, no press, nothing, just strolled in here and owns a third of this property?" And there it was, the full truth, exposed in a single sentence. Camille didn't need to answer. The room had heard it too clearly. Someone like you? Not. Someone unverified? Not. Someone without paperwork? No. He meant someone who looked like her. A black woman, middle-aged, alone, calm, quietly successful. That's who they couldn't picture on the ownership deed. Camille exhaled slowly, not from defeat, but from confirmation. "Thank you," she said, her voice low, nearly reverent. "Thank you for saying it out loud. I was beginning to think you might keep pretending this was about policy." Gina shifted uncomfortably. Even Dean looked down at his shoes. Maya's eyes flicked toward Camille, then to Kyle, and back again. "You know what?" Kyle snapped. "We're done here. James, escort her out. I've had enough of this." "Don't touch me," Camille said, not with anger, but with finality. "I've warned you 3 times, and now you've made your choice." "Lady," James said, stepping forward, "please don't make this harder than it already is." Camille reached for her phone again, slowly, deliberately, and said, loud enough for the room to hear, "You might want to hold that thought." She pressed a single button, and the lobby doors opened. In walked a woman in a navy blue suit, carrying a leather briefcase and a badge clipped to her belt. Lauren Banks, Camille's executive assistant. She didn't say a word at first. She simply walked with purpose toward the desk, followed by 2 more individuals, Michael Chan, legal counsel, and Sarah Nguyen, Director of HR Operations. The energy in the lobby shifted instantly. Kyle stepped back. Gina's jaw tightened. Dean froze. James turned, posture stiff. Maya widened her eyes, and for the first time, smiled faintly, just barely. Lauren stopped beside Camille, looked her boss in the eye, and said one word. "Ready?" Camille nodded. "Right on time." Lauren turned to the group. "My name is Lauren Banks. This is Michael Chan from Legal, and Sarah Nguyen from HR. We're with Jordan Lux Holdings, the second largest stakeholder of Grand Oak Hotels." She placed a sealed folder on the desk. Inside is a verified, notarized document confirming Camille Jordan as majority board member for this location, with 30% ownership. Kyle's face drained of color. "This has to be some kind of—" "You've already said enough," Lauren interrupted calmly. "You denied service to an owner. You refused her reservation. You mocked her, questioned her integrity, and threatened her with police involvement. All of this was done publicly, in front of guests, on security cameras, and from what we understand—" She glanced toward Emily, who was still holding her phone up. "On a few cell phones. 2. Silence. Camille finally stepped forward. "I came here tonight to stay in a room I helped build, not to teach a lesson. But life has a way of offering you choices, and tonight, you all made yours." Her eyes swept across the lobby. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to stand here and wait while we conduct an emergency staff audit. Your names, your behavior, your decisions tonight, they're being documented. If you're lucky, you'll get a second chance. But I wouldn't count on it." James opened his mouth to speak, but Lauren simply raised her hand. "Let's not add obstruction to the list." The manager, the staff, the guests, all stood still, some in awe, some in guilt, some in fear. Camille turned, not with rage, not even with triumph, but with purpose. "You treated me like I didn't belong. But this building, this company, this industry, I belong here more than any of you ever realized. And now, that's about to change." And with that, she stepped away from the desk, her suitcase gently rolling behind her, as the staff scrambled to figure out what would happen next. Because what came after this wasn't just consequences, it was accountability, and it had just walked through the front door. For the first time that night, the Grand Oak Hotel lobby was completely silent. Not the kind of quiet you get in a luxury hotel where everything is designed to feel calm and expensive, but the kind of silence that comes after a storm touches down and no one knows where it will strike next. Camille stood tall near the front desk, flanked by her assistant Lauren Banks, her attorney Michael Chan, and Sarah Nguyen from corporate HR. The sealed folder with official documents still rested between her and the staff who had just spent the last 15 minutes trying to remove her from a building she partially owned. Kyle, the duty manager, looked like he'd just swallowed gravel. His eyes bounced between Camille and the paperwork like he was trying to find a loophole that simply didn't exist. Gina, the senior receptionist, had taken 2 steps back and was clutching the edge of the counter like it might hold her job in place. Dean, the security guard who had almost dragged Camille's suitcase out of the building, had dropped his hands to his sides, frozen. And James, the head of hotel security who had threatened to call the police, was now quietly staring at the floor, jaw clenched, as if realizing every second of the evening had just become career-defining. It wasn't just embarrassment hanging in the air, it was exposure. Camille didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. She simply opened the folder and slid 1 page forward on the counter. "This is the original shareholder agreement for the Grand Oak Midtown property," she said, her tone still cool, almost measured. "Dated and signed by the board of Grand Oak Holdings. Just 8 months ago. My name is right there. Camille Jordan. 30% ownership. Second largest stakeholder in this hotel. She looked up slowly, locking eyes with Kyle. The woman you just told to get out, Kyle stammered. I didn't have access to that information at the time. You didn't ask, Camille said, cutting him off. You assumed. She turned her gaze to Gina, who looked like she wanted to disappear into the tile floor. You said I wasn't in the high-tier guest system, even after I gave you my name, my reservation, my ID. You looked at me and decided I didn't fit the profile of someone who stays in a presidential suite. Camille's eyes didn't flash with anger. There was something far more uncomfortable in them. Truth. Quiet. Undeniable. Sharp truth. Every person behind this desk had a chance to ask a question. Instead, you made a judgment. And that judgment, on camera, in front of witnesses, could cost this property more than just bad PR. Michael, the attorney, nodded beside her. All of your actions tonight are now part of a formal report. This includes breach of guest protocol, racial profiling, and failure to verify identity before removal. We've compiled video evidence and third-party footage from multiple angles. We are currently preparing documentation to submit to both internal review boards and, if necessary, legal channels. Gina gasped slightly, clearly rattled. Wait, we didn't mean... You didn't have to, Camille said. It was written all over your face. Then she turned to James. You called me a disturbance, threatened to call the NYPD. You told me my presence was unsettling to the guests. When in fact, it was you that disrupted the peace of this hotel. James didn't reply. He couldn't. Lauren stepped forward and laid a printed sheet of names on the counter. These are the employees currently under internal review based on this evening's events. As of now, you're all suspended pending formal investigation. Kyle opened his mouth to object, but Sarah from HR spoke up first. Mr. Breyer, we'll be taking your key card and ID badge before you leave the premises tonight. Same goes for you, Ms. Madsen, Mr. McCarty, and Mr. Holt. One by one. Their eyes dropped. Their shoulders fell. Their grip on power slipped. Camille took a slow breath. She wasn't triumphant. She wasn't cruel. If anything, she looked tired. Tired of having to fight for recognition in places she already belonged. I didn't come here to fire anyone, she said, her voice lower now. I came here to rest. I booked a suite. I had a meeting in the morning, but instead of being greeted like a guest, I was treated like a threat. She turned slightly to face the guests who had gathered on the sidelines, some of whom were still recording, others simply watching in awe. I know this isn't new to some of you, and for those who've never experienced it, this is how it happens. Quietly, casually, confidently, until someone stands up and says no more. Maya, the young front desk clerk who had tried to speak up earlier, stood with her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Camille looked at her and gave a single nod of acknowledgement, not because Maya had done everything right, but because she had tried, and that still mattered. Lauren handed Camille a new key card. Presidential suite is ready. Ms. Jordan, Bell staff's already taken your luggage upstairs. Camille smiled faintly. Good. I'm going to need the rest. She turned back to Kyle one last time. If there's anything left to salvage in your career, I suggest you spend less time looking at people and more time listening to them. Then she walked across the lobby, not escorted, not watched like a problem, but followed by silence and the weight of every assumption that had just been shattered. And as the elevator doors closed behind her, Camille Jordan didn't just reclaim her room, she reclaimed the power they tried to strip away, and left them all standing in the ruins of their own behavior the next morning. The Grand Oak Midtown Hotel didn't feel the same. The lobby was quieter than usual, Not because there were fewer guests, but because the staff walked slower, spoke softer, and kept their eyes open wider than they had the day before. News had spread overnight, not just about what happened with Camille Jordan, but about what it meant, internally. The hotel's group chat had gone silent. People weren't gossiping. They were waiting, wondering. Camille arrived at the executive boardroom just before 9 a.m., dressed in a charcoal blazer, crisp white blouse, and a calm expression that didn't need to say, "I'm in charge," because everyone in the room already knew. She wasn't there to play hero. She wasn't there to hold a grudge. She was there to rebuild what they broke and make sure it never happened again. Lauren sat to her left. Sarah Nguyen, head of HR for Jordan Lux Holdings, sat across from her with a thick binder of printouts. Michael Chan, the attorney, joined remotely on a large monitor behind them. At the far end of the table were two regional directors from the Grand Oak brand, both of whom had flown in at dawn after seeing the footage. They were pale, visibly shaken, and completely silent. Camille opened the meeting without a slideshow, without a speech, and without an apology for being direct. "Let's get one thing clear," she said. "I'm not here to fire a few bad employees and walk away smiling. This wasn't an accident. It was a culture problem, and culture is leadership." No one dared to interrupt. She went on. "What happened in the lobby wasn't about policy. It wasn't about payment methods or verification procedures. It was about assumption. It was about quiet bias being louder than any training manual. And if we don't deal with that now, it'll bleed into every guest interaction this hotel has." Sarah opened the binder and began laying out the early results of their overnight audit. Every staff interview, every guest complaint, and every employee file was being reviewed, not just from that night, but from the last 90 days. They found patterns, consistent flags from minority guests about cold service, being ignored, denied upgrades, or asked for extra ID. None of it had been flagged as discrimination at the time, but looking at it now, Camille saw what she already knew. The system hadn't failed once. It had failed quietly, over and over again. Camille tapped her pen once on the table and said, "Effective immediately. We're initiating a property-wide culture reset. Every staff member from management to bellhop will complete a mandatory 3-day intensive anti-bias and hospitality integrity training. No exceptions. You don't pass the course, you don't come back to work." One of the regional directors finally spoke up. "That's going to create major scheduling gaps. We can't afford that kind of disruption." Camille turned to him and simply said, "You already did." Silence. She continued. "We're creating a new position, guest equity manager, stationed on site at every Grand Oak location. Their role will be to review in-person treatment patterns, not just guest surveys. Anonymous audits will follow monthly. And I want that position filled with people who've lived this experience, not those who've only studied it in HR textbooks." Sarah nodded in full agreement. Already writing the job description, Camille wasn't finished. "We're also issuing public acknowledgement, not a press release, an acknowledgement. To every guest who was present yesterday, you'll receive a letter, signed by me, not denying what happened, not spinning it, but naming it, and promising it won't happen again," Michael added, via monitor. "We've already had legal teams from 4 equity watchdog organizations reach out overnight. You'll want to act quickly before this becomes a national conversation." Camille looked him straight in the eye through the screen. "It already is." Then she stood, walked slowly to the window, looked out at the Manhattan skyline with the weight of experience in her bones. "People think power is about walking in and throwing your name around," she said. "But I didn't need them to know who I was last night. I needed them to see how they treated someone they thought was no one." She turned back. "That's what this reform is about." The meeting concluded without debate. Camille wasn't just another executive fixing a PR mess. She was setting a new blueprint, one where identity wasn't just something printed on a badge or hidden in a spreadsheet. It was something seen, heard, and respected. The first time. As she exited the boardroom, several staff members watched her from a distance. Some nodded. A few lowered their eyes. Maya, the young front desk clerk who'd spoken up the night before, was standing by the coffee station, nervously fidgeting with a stir stick. Camille walked straight over to her. "Maya," she said. Maya straightened quickly. "Yes, ma'am? You spoke up when no one else would. That matters." Maya swallowed hard. "I tried. Trying counts," Camille said. "I want you to report directly to the guest equity manager starting next month. And until then, you're the interim lead at the front desk, with full authority to model the kind of hospitality we expect going forward." Maya blinked, stunned. "Me?" "Yes," Camille said. "You. Not because of what you know, but because of what you saw, and because you had the courage to say it out loud." Camille gave her a firm nod, then continued walking, suitcase in hand, her heels softly tapping across the marble, not in anger, not in triumph, but in transformation. Because what happened next wasn't just about replacing bad staff, it was about rewriting the rules, from the lobby to the top. A week later, the story of what happened at the Grand Oak Midtown Hotel had quietly traveled far beyond its marble floors. It hadn't made the front page of national news. There were no viral hashtags, no boycotts, no protests. But within the hospitality industry, within corporate circles, and especially among those who had once been silently passed over at check-in counters, it was a moment that spoke louder than any headline. Camille Jordan didn't need to shout to be heard. Her actions spoke with precision, not rage, and her legacy was unfolding not through punishment, but through transformation. The hotel had changed, not on the surface, where flowers still sat perfectly arranged in gold vases and the bellhop still wore crisp white gloves. No, the change was deeper. Staff meetings now opened with the phrase, "Hospitality begins with humility." Every new employee, from reception to finance, received a copy of the Grand Oak Respect Policy, a living document born from what happened to Camille that night. Maya, the once overlooked front desk clerk who had dared to speak up, now led her team with quiet confidence. She didn't walk with power, but with purpose. She had learned that doing the right thing didn't always come with applause, but sometimes it came with responsibility. Camille visited the hotel again, not to test them, not to remind them, but to meet with Maya and the newly appointed guest equity manager for their first one-on-one review. She arrived without announcement, no driver, no badge, same carry-on, same understated blazer, and this time, something felt different the moment she walked in. A staff member at the front desk saw her, smiled, and said, "Welcome back, Miss Jordan. We've been expecting you." Not because they were told to, but because they had learned to recognize people by presence, not just appearance. Camille smiled gently, nodded, and walked toward the cafe. On her way, she passed a small group of guests seated in the lounge, one of whom recognized her and quietly said, "Thank you for what you did." Camille didn't stop walking, but she turned her head and replied softly, "It was overdue." Upstairs, she met with Maya and the new equity manager, a middle-aged Latina woman named Teresa, who had spent years working in guest service and knew exactly what it felt like to be seen as invisible. Together, they went over feedback, reviewed new training models, and listened to stories from employees who now felt empowered to speak. One young housekeeper shared how, just days ago, a guest had spoken to her with disrespect, and her supervisor immediately stepped in and defended her, not because she asked, but because the culture had shifted. Camille smiled and said, "That's what leadership looks like," after the meeting. Camille walked the halls alone. She didn't need to inspect. She didn't need to correct. She was simply remembering. Remembering how easy it had been for them to doubt her, to push her aside, to assume she didn't belong, even in a space she helped build. But what stayed with her most wasn't the humiliation. It was the clarity, the truth that, even after all she had accomplished, even with a title, a stake, and a name, she still had to prove herself to people who had already made up their minds. That realization wasn't sad anymore. It was fuel. Because Camille understood that what happened to her wasn't rare. It was just finally visible. And that visibility, quiet, composed, and deliberate, was powerful. Before leaving the hotel, she sat briefly in the lobby, watching people move through the space. She noticed a young black couple checking in, being greeted warmly by the front desk. She noticed an elderly Asian man asking for assistance with his luggage, and a staff member offering to carry it without hesitation. She noticed a little girl of color, maybe 8 or 9, twirling in front of the giant windows, smiling, completely unaware that anyone in the world might ever question if she belonged. Camille smiled. That's what she wanted. Not revenge, not attention, just change. She stood to leave, but before she did, she walked up to Maya one last time. "Keep leading with your voice," she said. "Even when it shakes." Maya nodded. "Thank you for believing in me," Camille replied. "I didn't believe in you. I saw you. And that was enough." As she stepped outside, the air felt cooler than it had a week ago. The city was the same, busy, loud, chaotic, but she had changed something real inside one of its most polished corners. Not just policy, but perspective. Back in her car, Lauren waited in the passenger seat, scrolling through emails. "Next stop?" she asked. Camille looked out the window for a moment, then answered, "Wherever people are still being silenced." Lauren smiled and put her phone down. "Then we won't be home for a while." Camille nodded. "Good. We have work to do." And with that, the car pulled away from the curb, fading into the rhythm of the city, not with fanfare, not with applause, but with legacy. The kind you don't just leave behind, the kind you build. One conversation, one correction, and one courageous voice at a time. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment below to let us know how it made you feel. Thanks for watching.